The year is 1140, a rather chilly time in the Holy Roman Empire, one imagines. We find ourselves outside the stout walls of Weinsberg Castle in what is now Germany. King Conrad III was a powerful ruler, the first of the Hohenstaufen dynasty. He was, shall we say, a little bit cross with the Duke of Welf, who was holed up inside. This wasn't just a minor disagreement over whose turn it was to do the washing up. Oh no, this was a full-blown siege. A serious business involving armies, catapults, and a great deal of shouting, no doubt. The air would have been thick with tension and the smell of impending conflict quite unpleasant, really. The battle for Weinsberg was fierce, as battles often are. Swords clashed, arrows flew, and the defenders fought bravely to protect their homes and families. But King Conrad's forces were strong, very strong indeed. After many long weeks, perhaps even months, of grim determination on both sides, the supplies within Weinsberg began to dwindle. Hope, too, was running rather low. Eventually the town had no choice but to surrender to the might of King Conrad III. He was not known for being particularly forgiving when he felt he had been wronged, and the defenders of Weinsberg had certainly tested his patience. Now King Conrad III was, to put it mildly, quite furious with the men of Weinsberg. He felt they had defied him for far too long, causing him considerable trouble and expense. In his royal anger he decreed that all the men in the town were to be put to the sword. A rather grim prospect, wouldn't you agree? It was a harsh sentence, common in those days, designed to make an example of those who resisted royal authority. The women and children, he declared, would be spared. They would be allowed to leave, but only with what they could carry on their own backs. Imagine the despair that must have swept through Weinsberg. The men faced certain death. Their wives, mothers, and daughters faced a future without them, allowed to take only a few meager possessions. The atmosphere must have been utterly dreadful, a thick cloud of fear and sorrow hanging over every soul. Sieges were brutal affairs, often ending in tragedy for the losing side. The rules of war, if one could call them rules, were often cruel and unforgiving. The fate of Weinsberg seemed sealed, a dark chapter about to be written in its history, all because of a king's wrath. In the face of this terrible decree, the women of Weinsberg did not simply weep and wail, though one can hardly blame them if they did a bit of that too. They were, it turns out, rather resourceful. They decided to send a delegation to King Conrad III. One can picture them, a group of determined women, approaching the stern king. They pleaded for mercy, not for their husbands or sons directly, as they knew the king's mind was set against the men. Instead, they focused on the terms of their own departure, the small concession he had already granted them. They asked for clarification, perhaps with a hopeful quiver in their voices. King Conrad, perhaps a little surprised by their directness, listened to their plea. He was a king, and kings in those days had absolute power. He could have dismissed them out of hand. However, he reiterated his promise with a certain royal flourish. He confirmed that the women would indeed be allowed to leave the town unharmed. And crucially, he repeated his condition. They could take with them whatever they could carry on their own shoulders. He probably imagined them struggling with bundles of clothes, or perhaps a sack of precious grain. Little did he know what these clever women were plotting. The women returned to the doomed town, their minds buzzing. What could they carry that was more precious than anything else? What possession weighed most heavily on their hearts, if not literally on their shoulders? They gathered and whispered, their initial despair turning into a spark of audacious ingenuity. A plan began to form, a daring, almost unbelievable scheme. It was a plan that relied entirely on the king keeping his exact word, a gamble on his royal honor. They knew the risks. If the king felt tricked, the consequences could be even more severe for everyone involved. The night before the surrender must have been filled with frantic, secret preparations. There would have been anxious discussions, reassurances, and a great deal of prayer, one suspects. The men of Weinsberg, initially resigned to their fate, were likely astonished, then perhaps terrified, and finally filled with a desperate hope by the women's plan. The entire town was now banking on a very literal interpretation of the king's promise. The next morning would reveal whether their extraordinary courage and cleverness would pay off, or lead to an even greater tragedy for all of them. The fateful morning arrived. The gates of Weinsberg creaked open. King Conrad III and his army waited outside, expecting to see a sad procession of women carrying bundles of belongings. But what they saw instead was utterly astonishing. It was a sight that would go down in legend. Out came the women of Weinsberg, not bent under the weight of sacks or chests, but under the weight of their husbands. Each woman was struggling, yet determined, carrying her man upon her shoulders. Imagine the scene, a line of women, their faces strained with effort, each one bearing the most precious possession she could think of. King Conrad's generals and advisors were, to put it mildly, aghast. They were outraged. "This is a trick," they cried. "They are making a mockery of your royal decree, your majesty." They urged the king to stop the procession immediately. They argued that this was not what he had meant. Surely he had intended for them to carry inanimate objects, not their condemned husbands. The Duke of Friedrich, the king's own brother, was particularly incensed by this unexpected turn of events and strongly advised Conrad to halt this charade, insisting the men still deserved their punishment. But King Conrad III, despite the clamour from his advisors, simply watched the procession. He was a king, and his word, once given, was a matter of royal honour. After a moment of contemplation, perhaps even a wry smile playing on his lips at the sheer audacity of the women, he made his decision. He declared famously, "Ein Königswort soll man nicht brechen," which, for those whose German is a little rusty, means a king's word should not be broken. He would stand by his promise, even if it had been interpreted in a way he had not foreseen. What a splendid fellow in that moment, at least. And so the women of Weinsberg, with their precious burdens, were allowed to pass safely through the enemy lines. The men were saved, not by force of arms, but by the quick wits and unwavering loyalty of their wives, and by a king who valued his integrity above his anger. This remarkable event earned the women the nickname Treue Weiber von Weinsberg, the loyal wives of Weinsberg. The castle ruins are still known today as Weibertreu Women's Loyalty in honor of this extraordinary act of love, courage and cleverness. It's quite a tale, isn't it? This marvelous story from Weinsberg isn't just a quaint historical anecdote. It speaks volumes about the virtues of chivalry and integrity. Chivalry, you see, wasn't just about knights in shining armor jousting for fair maidens. At its heart, it was a code of conduct. It encompassed bravery, yes, but also mercy, fairness, and honor. King Conrad III, by choosing to uphold his word, even when it went against his initial punitive desires, displayed a rather unexpected but profound form of chivalry. He showed that true strength includes the ability to be merciful and honorable, even to one's defeated foes. The integrity on display is twofold, really. First, there's the incredible integrity of the women. Their loyalty to their husbands was absolute, leading them to devise such an ingenious and physically demanding plan. Their cleverness was rooted in a deep commitment. Then there's King Conrad's integrity. He could have easily found a loophole or simply changed his mind, claiming he'd been tricked. Many a lesser ruler might have done so. But he chose to honor his promise, demonstrating that a leader's word is, or at least should be, their bond. This steadfastness is a cornerstone of true integrity. Now you might think, well, that's all very well for the 12th century, but what about today in 2025? These values of chivalry, in its broader sense of fairness and respect and integrity, are just as crucial now. Think about leaders who keep their promises to their people, even when it's difficult. Consider businesses that operate transparently and honestly with their customers and employees. In our personal lives, too, being someone who can be trusted, who stands by their commitments, builds strong relationships. It's about doing the right thing, even when no one is watching, or when it's easier not to. The tale of the clever women of Weinsberg and King Conrad III serves as a timeless reminder. It reminds us of the power of wit, the strength of loyalty, and the profound importance of keeping one's word. In a world that often seems complicated and cynical, this simple story shines a light on the enduring value of honor. A promise made should indeed be a promise kept, whether you're a medieval king facing a line of women carrying their husbands or just trying to be a decent human being in the 21st century. It's a rather good principle to live by, don't you think?